Welcome everyone to our awakening class. This is the sixth one, and I wanted to start us off today talking about the structure, uh, just structure in general. Paul just joined us as well. Welcome, Paul. So I've been contemplating structure a lot lately and the importance of structure. I think it's easy to um, uh, disagree with structure, not like structure, rebel against structure. But there's an interesting component about structure that I think is easily overlooked, and it's that if there wasn't a structure, there would be no way for growth to occur. It's like there needs to be some inherent structure in which to either push against or to even have a place in which to reason from. And so that structure can be an organization. The structure could be a workplace. The structure could be, heck, it could even be the foundation in which you build a home upon. The structure could be even our physical body is a structure in which is the vehicle for growth to happen. Another way you could even look at structure is our thinking. We have a particular structure of thinking due to all the experiences we've had in our life, what you could call the conditioning, and that structure is literally the framework in which we either push against maybe someone else's structure or in which we reason with our experiences from. We reason with our experiences from the point of structure, in which is our thinking. So I've seen so much value in structure lately, and how you may even consider our limitations within our own thinking an important structure. It doesn't really matter what the structure is. Even these lessons in this class is a place of which we can either push against or we can speak from that point in a reasoning kind of way. And from there being a point to reason from, or from there being a structure, is literally what allows the growth to happen. So I've been contemplating this idea of structure lately, and just the importance of what we can easily rebel against or push against or disagree with or say no to, but really it's the structure in all of our lives everywhere that is even allows the possibility for growth to happen. So I've just been kind of contemplating that lately, and I wanted to share it with you because it kind of relates to the last lesson, which was all about support. It's like the last lesson we looked at support in terms of what normally we might push against or not like say a bad past experience. Well, that bad past experience is literally the structure in which we can either push against or reason from in order to know how to move forward and grow. So, once again, the inherent importance in structure. There's Kara coming in. Hi, Kara, welcome. And also the general importance of the last lesson, which was, once again, all about support. Either seeing our bad past experiences as supportive in order to have the structure to either push against or reason from to know which direction we want to move forward on. And really that last lesson, I think, boiled down to us having one of two choices. We can either view this structure point as against us, which is super easy to do. It's like our bad experience, the experience that happened was bad, and so therefore kind of against us, really. Or, so that's option one, as the lesson spoke about essentially. Or option two is we can learn to see in what ways that bad experience or every experience is really here to support us. And so I'm kind of wondering in what way that lesson moved in you guys throughout the week in regards to structure, or whatever way your mind moved with it, or support, and any experiences with that, and or even what part of it resonated with you the most, or stuck with you, or that you remember the most. unmute yourself if anyone who has any thoughts about that.
Not so much directly related from the lesson, but with a lot of the stuff that I've gotten involved with lately, it seems like it's been slap in the face, not bad slap in the face obvious, but it's been obvious to me how certain things have been either a guiding point or kind of a halfway goal or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think just the lesson itself made me really think back to a situation that I was in that made me, well, I guess, was kind of my catalyst of change and evolving. I think if that situation had never happened to me, would I still be that person that was always the people pleaser and doing
Mm-hmm.
what my parents thought I should do and doing what these people think instead of making choices for myself, being me. And, it made me really think back to when that kind of started for myself.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That's awesome. Can you give us a little sneak peek on what that experience was?
I actually was in a very emotionally abusive relationship,
Right.
and I there was he was had some mental illness, and basically I kind of felt like I fought myself through that and to live
Mm-hmm.
in it because a lot of people thought it would end up murder suicide. It was very deep, terrible stuff. But like after coming out of it and past it, it made me stronger and realized that I could do a lot of things on my own and make my own decisions. And because before it was just all what other people thought I should do. What I did things for what other people thought, and getting through that made me realize to make my own choices and do my own things. And I don't know, it made me. It was horrible for a long time, but it made me a very strong person.
Totally. That's an amazing story. It's kind of like if it wasn't for that opportunity, like you said, there would have continue on the people pleasing tendency, kind of just going along with whatever. But because it was so severe, because it was so obviously inappropriate and something that you couldn't rationalize living with, it caused you to begin to make choices for yourself in such a way now that you probably really made choices far and beyond what maybe of course, what was happening in that moment, but maybe even what reasoning for yourself, what you really want or believe versus what maybe even society or the general population would think. So yeah, I could totally see how that would be really empowering. Isn't that crazy though? It's like clearly a terrible situation you're describing.
It was at the time. I couldn't see my way out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I just thought, okay, this is going to be my reality. This is going to be my life. And there was finally a point where I was like, no, this is not going to be, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make these choices. But there was just some point where I decided to fight and like dig myself out of it. And once I did that and came out on the other side of all of that, now I'm a totally different personality.
Right. You said a really
Uh,
good point a second ago. You said I couldn't see my way through it at the time, and it was really terrible. You couldn't see, um, couldn't see my way through it. And I'm wondering, what would you say to yourself back then if you were to say something to them to help them get through that most difficult spot where they couldn't see their way through and they didn't know where the heck they were going?
on the other side of it, I would just tell myself, you're going to be okay. And this is only temporary.
Good. Right. That's cool. Does anyone else have anything to add?
You mentioned analogy of what might seem like a bad thing from a tree's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's obviously very basic and elemental. And I have a dozen or so oak trees here in my yard. And I was outside doing a standing meditation. And so I kind of threw that question up in the air to the oak trees. And they were unanimous. The first thing they told me was chainsaws.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Definitely, that would be the worst thing. Probably to a human, they would say a gun. Certain death.
The crank chainsaw sound.
Oh no, yeah, I prefer I prefer a gun to a chainsaw, please.
Yeah, no kidding.
I don't know, if somebody is hallucinating and seeing aliens everywhere, do you want them to have either of those?
Yeah, cool. You're funny, Stan. That's a good one. Did anyone else have any memorable parts from the lesson, or something that resonated with them, or any experiences to share from the week?
It's been interesting creating my own structure.
What do you mean?
Since I've been working on trying to get my class going, everything has kind of not exactly revolved around that, but it's like, because I'm doing that and not stuck in a 9-to-5 job or anything, I've got more flexibility, but at the same time, it's like I created a schedule that works for me, and then here's my mom like, well, can't you just throw it all out the window and start next week? No, I can't. No, I can't. The next class starts April 5, and I can't be in two classes at once at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't understand that to throw that out now would mess me up for the rest of the year.
Mm. You know, I've found, Carolyn, that people who have their own work schedule that they can create, like you're describing, it seems like their family members the most don't understand that it's easy for family members to look at it and be like, oh, well, you can do anything you want. But there is an important structure there, and if it isn't upheld, then just like any job, things start to fall apart.
Yeah.
It's easy for family members to do that, though.
And I also think it's not the structure they're used to, so they think it's not right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I work 9 to 5, and my dad still doesn't seem to understand that he calls me at 2 p.m. and what you doing?
Oh no.
I'm working. I'm at my job. That's what people do
Right.
during the day when they aren't retired. Like, he doesn't get it at all.
That's
and that's
hilarious.
Just a whole different issue.
And she's a nurse at a hospital 3 hours away from me, so it's like she's going and going and going and doesn't know how to relax.
Yep.
I'd like to, this is Paul, I'd like to explore something that Shara said.
Please.
And Brian, you sort of put another focus on it. But I'd like to maybe unpack that a little bit for my own personal benefit, because seeing the structure, seeing the story, seeing the purpose for the past, things you've experienced, things you've learned, that hasn't been a foreign concept to me for some time. So when I reviewed the recording last night of last week's lesson, I'm sitting there going, yeah. You know, I'm like, and it was very uplifting, very encouraging to have it laid out like that. But both Shara and Brian were talking about a transition point where you take those experiences, you take that structure, and you say, okay, now it's time to do something with it. Now it's time to make a change. Now it's time to turn a page and start writing a new chapter. And I'm right at that point myself. And I keep vacillating back and forth between, yeah, but, or maybe I'm in a spot now that I need to just work through, and it's very unmotivating, unproductive. And maybe I should just step back and observe that and take it in and hope that lightning strikes me somewhere along the way and I get a complete reboot and I become a different person. So there's something in that transition when you make choices and you stick with them and you feel they're right for you to make those choices, because they're drastic, can be drastic choices, as Shara pointed out. But if they don't feel right for you, it seems that you would not accept those choices, those points of moving forward. And then there's a judgment you make: is what I see moving forward right for me? Can I internalize it? Is it mine now? Or is it not quite right for me? Am I still spiraling through all these good, bad, good, bad, good, bad? I mean, am I still zipping around? It's not, the timing is not right yet. I don't have to be productive right now. I got some time. I can just sit. Nobody's depending on me for anything. I enjoy my job driving a school bus, and that's my life right now. But there's so many things on the edge, I feel, and so many things close, that I'm waiting to step out and go to that next page, go to that next chapter, and be very productive and be a very good contributor to the universe, to society, to other people. And so if individuals in this group could explain that transition point for them, what was it that flipped it? That might be very useful. I don't know if it's useful for everybody else, but maybe this is just a personal thing. But it might be good to, shed some light on that little frame of time.
Totally. Who's got something?
I just go ahead.
Only you know it is right for you. I think if you can't decide, then it's maybe not right.
Well, could be. You're right. I agree. But what if the definition of me that I'm using to determine if it's right is flawed? What if that's a definition I'm maybe used to, and I think this step is too far of a reach for me. I'm not good enough for that. I'm not worthy enough for that. I'm not valuable enough for that. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Corbin, I feel like you got something good. You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. I really appreciate that question, Paul. I like that a lot. That's a hearty question. That point is so challenging. And I think you got to look at like what your natural tendencies are. And of course, I consider myself somewhat ignorant, so maybe don't take this advice. But my thought is that, like for me, my natural tendencies are ready, fire, aim. So I'm a go-getter. So like I get stuff done. So I pull the trigger too fast a lot of the time, And so when I'm in a spot like that, for me, I have to go, and I look at my past and how it's affected me. And in my past, pulling the trigger too fast has kind of built this pattern and structure in my life to where now when I'm in a spot like that, I go, okay, maybe I do need to take a little more time to make this decision. But they say that I'm like very few people that are very action oriented and will jump off the cliff because I'm an entrepreneur, so I'll jump off and build the plane on the way down. and I have been since I was 16. So, I mean, I'm very action oriented. They say that most people, and if you read some books around the subject of like how to know when to jump, they say most people are in analysis paralysis because they don't believe in themselves enough. They don't believe in what they can truly accomplish. And one of the questions I would ask myself in situations like that is, if I try and I fail, will I be proud of myself that I tried? Will I have more respect for myself because I tried something and failed than if I never tried at all? And a lot of the time, if you're in analysis paralysis, the idea is, yeah, maybe I would be proud of myself for at least trying. And then going through to kind of clarify, like, what's the worst thing that would happen if I tried? Because a lot of the time, we make it seem and feel like if we try something, it's going to tear our whole life apart. And in reality, often it sets us back for a couple months, or, often people are like, and I'm just using job examples and stuff. I don't know your particular situation, but often, like, worst case scenario, like, their old job would probably take them back. Like, they have a good repertoire. They could find another job easy or whatever. And so it's really not that much of a repercussion to at least try something, but you got to balance it out for yourself. Everybody's situation's particular, and yeah, that's just kind of a thought I have, because I'm in that mode all the time of, should I make this jump? Should I, and sometimes it's not the right decision, and I've made the jump many times into doing something that it's not the right decision, but it teaches me a lesson that then I can make better decisions from, and I will say people learn more from, you don't learn much from things going well. You learn from things going poorly. So failure sometimes is just a stepping stone. And so, you can't be afraid of failure. Yeah, that's my thought. Hope that helped.
I just kind of coming off of that as a different kind of personality is, if you're like, that failure may dive you deeper backwards. If you take that jump and you're not ready and you fail, then it may take you 5 steps backwards, because then you failed at what you did. Where I think that's a different personality thing. Like myself, I've tried things in the past when I wasn't ready and they failed, and then I think about all that failure for how long and how, what a failure I am, and I can't do this, so then I'm in my head with all that, and I can't move past it, and it takes me longer to move past it. And I think that's a personality thing maybe, but I don't know, just in my personal situation with that, like, I've just had this like click in my head, when I've made decisions for stuff, because there's been many times I've wanted to change different things, but, and been unsure, about should I do this or should I not. I'm probably in that analysis paralysis stuff for sure. But I think if you're sitting there doubting it, I think you may need to step back and see why, think about why you're doubting it. I think you need to dig deeper into why you want that change and why you're doubting that you can make that change. I think you just need to look deeper. That's my personality, what I would do.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too when he's like, I can't do this because. You got to look at each one of those statements and decide if that's really true. Or just what you're in the habit of thinking about yourself because your parent told you that when you were 4 or whatever.
Yeah.
I agree with those both for sure. I'm kind of an extremist. I do think fear is educated into us and it can be educated out of us.
Yeah.
And so bringing more clarity, you know, maybe you're uncomfortable because you don't have clarity around it. They talk about like rock climbers, those guys that free climb without any harnesses and stuff. They have rehearsed it so many times in their mind that they know they're not going to make a mistake. So also preparing yourself. Sometimes you might not be prepared enough. And so you're holding back because you know you're not really fully prepared. And sometimes it takes more diligence in that area.
I can agree. I do agree with that when you talk about the preparedness, because I know in my situation I was explaining in that relationship that I mentally had to think through all of the things. And then when I finally said, this is what's going to happen, this is what I'm going to do, I was prepared in my head for what could happen. I do agree with that. Prepared.
Something that came to mind, and I wrote a few things down, Corbin, while you were talking, and looking at natural tendencies to me just shouted out to me, because I think most people know their natural tendencies. They know, maybe they know their comfort zones, and so looking at those natural tendencies and saying, okay, what is a good fit for my natural tendencies, using that phrase, and am I looking at something that'll be a good fit for that, or am I going off in some completely different direction? Another thought that Brian was talking about, structure. I like that term. I missed the very first of this, probably when you introduced that, but I like what you're saying there. But this looks like creating structure in real time. We're creating our own structure as we go, and which is what we did in the past, and which we expect to see in the future. And as Brian did, we talked about last time, not to fear that. It got us to where we are now, and it's going to get us to where we're going to be then.
Right.
And don't look at it in fear. And right now, real time, today, this minute, is more structure building, be it comfortable or uncomfortable. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was cool. I love it whenever it turns into like a mastermind situation like that. My thought, I think, that I would include is writing helps me so much to clarify where there's doubt or unclarity. And so for me, in the situation like you're describing, I would write out the process of moving from the point you're at to the point you want to go. So that way you could clarify within your own thinking what the likelihood of that process would be. And I think it would all tend to fall in place pretty quickly after you clarify that.
One last tidbit, if I may. I agree with that so much, Brian, because getting it on paper can help you figure out so much. And some of the like prompts that may help can be like, if I do this and I succeed in 5 years, where will I be? You know, and getting that long-term vision to kind of backtrack, you know, and if I do this and I fail in 5 years, where will I be? You know, what will my alternatives be? And just getting all that spilled out on journaling, you know, can really help you to self-discover.
That's part of the visualization process. And it helps all levels of mind, not only to visualize it, but to lock in on it. And it provides a structure. Just what you were talking about a while ago, Brian. Structure tends to bring clarity.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, there's some ideas right there, Paul. hopefully maybe there was some takeaway from it. I know we don't know exactly what's really happening there, but just from what was described, I think that we've all been in that point where we are, it's time to take an action, or it's or we're looking at something that we really want. And as we get closer and closer, and I think every step along the way supports us to getting closer. But as we get closer, then it's like, when am I fully gonna know that this is the step I'm gonna take? And that point right there can be challenging sometimes. So I appreciate us all talking about that specific point right there.
May I add something else?
Yes, Dan.
It also oftentimes helps to try to put yourself in a third party frame of mind, like you're analyzing someone else's situation, and then you can, it's oftentimes easier to come up with the suggestions you would make for that other person.
That's a good point. I like that. And another thing that came to my mind while you were saying that, Stan, was instead of it staying as it being me as why I'm going to make this choice, if I can move it from it being personal to seeing how many people this is going to help, then it's much easier to make a leap when you know it's for the goodness of other people versus just your selfish self.
Exactly. It brings some mental expansion there.
Yeah. Cool. So back to our original question, and Sunshine, welcome. Glad to have you. Where we're at is we're kind of just discussing what had happened last week, either just in our lives in general, particularly related to the lesson last week, which was about support and how, in what way these challenging or painful or bad situations are supporting us, and just seeing if anyone had any kind of either experiences with that, or even just generally favorite part in the lesson, or yeah, any experiences like that related to the lesson.
They did have an experience related to that.
Cool.
Well, I guess long story short, there was been a lot of unexpected events and happenings here at home this last week, and a lot of ups and downs, and it's really been cool to see the effect that it's had as we've continued to go through it and join together in unity, and to see the support that we have for each other. It's something we haven't really seen to this degree before, and it's really been neat.
You're talking about your family life?
What?
Your home life?
Yes.
Cool. Nice job. I'm happy to hear that. That's wonderful. Thank you for the update. I know you've been keeping me updated on a lot of the stuff that's been happening in your life, so.
It was a bit of a tumultuous roller coaster. It's work to see everybody coming together like this.
Cool.
To see everybody beginning to realize that the universe has your back, and so do we.
Exactly. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to add? What resonated with you about the lesson, or maybe even challenges in understanding how seemingly bad things can be supportive? Because when we see, kind of like someone was saying earlier so well, when we see how we've been, I don't know who it was, how we've been supported this whole time, that it's much easier to assume that whatever comes forward, it's not necessary to fear, because again, we will be supported by whatever comes next. So it's just very, very valuable to be able to know that. So if anyone's having any challenges with seeing that in their own life, in even just the littlest way, it would be helpful to talk about it before we move on. Okay, cool. Yeah, Kara.
I'm listening to a book right now. It's called Getting Unstuck, but a lot of the book talks about this concept of Shimpa, which is basically exactly what we're talking about here, where your Shimpa is where your mind thinks this happened and it was good or bad, or I have this feeling and it's good or bad.
Yeah.
And really, you just, that's Shimpa. You can't think about anything as a good or bad. It just is.
Yeah. What language is that word from?
I am sure it's Sanskrit.
Cool.
Or whatever, I don't know. It's Shempa, I think.
That's awesome. That sounds like a good book. It's going to be fun. Next week, we're kind of going to go into the importance and value of seeing things as good and bad, which is like the opposite of what we've been doing. It's like we've been looking at the ways in which good and bad are just the most surface level interpretation, which they are. And also it's helpful because to know how to work with good and bad, because that's literally the most surface level foundation in which we interpret our experiences by. And so by seeing the whole dynamic as broad as possible, it helps us navigate our lives with greater ease. So next week should be a pretty interesting one too. So on lesson 5, did anyone have any experiences with gazing at the tree? Or the journal experience, the journal entry, which was what might seem like a bad thing from a tree's perspective. Both those exercises are kind of related, the exercise and the journal. And how is this bad thing necessary for the whole, and how does that relate to growth?
I have a question on that was prompted today when Katie sent that image of her next to that tree and the short little note that she added to that it was a tree that was dying, and that really stuck my attention. And you're talking about contributing to the whole, and I guess dying is just another contribution to the whole.
Good point. That's cool. Yeah, I like that. Is that kind of the conclusion that you'd come to, Katie? Katie?
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking about was death being a necessary part of life.
And it really does add to the whole too. In the example of the tree, when the tree dies, it degrades into the ground and becomes soil, it becomes nutrients.
Probably grow some really delicious mushrooms.
Probably would. And be food for many different animals and insects. So once again, it's helpful just to see how everything isn't a fixed thing or isn't a blunted thing. The death of the tree isn't the end of anything. It's all a continual movement of cycles. And so it's just helpful to be able to see that. When you see that in nature, and then you start to look at it in your own life, then all of a sudden it can make those bad situations seem less bad. It gives them a purpose.
I wrote down that if my trees would have still had their leaves when the ice storm hit, they probably would have all broken. None of my trees broke, but if they still had their leaves, they would have broken, I'm sure, because they were pretty bent over. And also, I've noticed from my tree in the front yard, it's just a Bradford pear, but it still has the little fruit things on it. And birds are out there constantly messing with those. So I have a feeling that the leaves being down also helps birds to find food and spread seeds, yada yada.
Mm-hmm. Totally. It gives them an opportunity to do that, right? With greater ease. Did you guys see the example that I posted on our? I sent a text to some of you about that, where it's like, I did some research on seasons because I wanted to know exactly what this process is, and of course, the tree loses its leaves due to the season, but we have even seasons, of course, because of the axis, the wobbling axis that the Earth spins on. And I learned that if it wasn't for that axis, then there would be a lot of crops that wouldn't grow. Crops are dependent on there being seasons for the growth cycle of the crop. And also, if it wasn't for the wobble, if it wasn't for the season, then of course certain parts of the planet wouldn't get any sun. And so it's literally the seasons that sustain life on many different levels on the planet, which when we look at this tree, the most surface level interpretation, and we see the leaves have fallen from it, it can seem like a bad thing. And if that was an emotional experience, if that tree was having a bad emotional experience, we could easily look at that. If the leaves falling off the trees was representative of a bad emotional experience, we could easily look at that and be like, oh, that's bad. But then when we realize what this experience is creating for the whole or creating for the future, if it's an individual and an emotional experience, then you start to see that is just the most surface level interpretation. Yeah, it probably isn't all that comfortable for the tree to be frozen in wintertime or to lose its leaves or whatever, but it is part of the growth process, and it and is supporting the growth process.
I think it also points to how everything is interrelated. If the axis was different and there were parts of the earth that were always dark, they would just have different kind of plants.
That's true, yeah.
And so it's just like, is that even bad?
Mm-hmm,
I don't
right.
know. Like, it's I don't think so. And it just, everything's related, and if something bad didn't happen to the tree, then something bad could happen to all the other things, like we're not hunting enough deer, so the deer are overpopulated and they start getting wasting disease. And like, if things are all interrelated, and if any one thing gets out of balance, it kind of starts knocking everything out of balance.
I love how you're seeing things so interrelated. That's exactly right. I think that was the point of the lesson too. Any other thoughts about that stuff, guys? The exercise or the little journal thing?
All out of hair to
Yeah.
dying trees.
Let's hear it.
The disease with bees right now, they're having that split wing issue, and that's the depletion of the bees in the world and everything like that. Well, they found that the cure for those bees' wings is through a mushroom and that mushroom grows on dying wood, rotted trees. And so they have like this program where you inoculate these trees with these mushrooms and all this stuff in areas with bees, especially Oklahoma, to help fix the split wing. And that makes me think that, if there wasn't the death of that tree and the ability for that mushroom to grow and the bees to find and smell that mushroom and heal from it, then they say without the bees, like the world collapses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like our food system,
Right.
everything dies, and that's like why saving the bees is the one thing that unites everybody, because it's like, so detrimental. And without death, then those bees wouldn't be able to live,
Yeah. Good points. Anyone else have anything to add?
Mushrooms will save the world.
Boom. There you
Yeah,
go.
I like how as humans we think, oh, we'll just spray some mushroom spores and then the bees will be better and everything will be fine. Like, it's butterfly wings, and it's gonna, whatever we're doing, we're just throwing a little more weight on the other side of the scale. And I don't think it's gonna fix anything.
Right.
But whatever.
Yeah, I hear you. Cool. Awesome. I like the way you guys are thinking. In terms of, instead of like so rooted in the individual, which is also an important part, but it's super helpful to expand out to see how everything is like an ecosystem supporting itself, including our bad experiences, including our bad painful emotions, including all of that. There is a type of supporting when you can see how what we do to each other and what is actually a doing for each other at one level. All right, guys. So let's move on to the next lesson. The next lesson is lesson 6, and this one is called the evolution cycles. So I'm going to see if I can do this screen sharing thing with you guys. Okay, lesson 6. Let me know if you guys can see it. Thumbs up. That's a good sign. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, lesson 6. The evolution cycle. I've also got an image that I'll show you guys at some point too that illustrates what these words are saying as well. I'll show you that at some point. Okay, the evolution cycle. We know from our own experiences that there is no possible way for bad things to happen to us. I'm sorry. There's no possible way for bad things not to happen to us. And so we all know that from our own experiences. We've all had clearly bad things happen to us. And so we know that there's no possible way for, quote, bad things to not happen to us. Those things in which we call bad things, there's no way for them not to happen to us. In the last lesson, which is all about support, we discovered that if we stay believing that nothing good came from the bad things in our past, then this automatically casts, and this is so fascinating to me, a scary shadow of a future where we need to be in resistance or fear what might come around the next corner. So that's quite a bit of motivation to try to understand this cycles of an ecosystem that is actually a propulsion that's helping us rather than hurting us in some way. This colors not only our projected future, but also filters how we see and interact with people in the present. Therefore, we are learning how to find that element of good. more specifically, we are learning to recognize what we have become through the past experience. To see that without these bad things, we wouldn't have what we value as who we are today. So you can just imagine the things of your personality that you've come to value. Particularly find the ones that you do value in the present, and actively look to see in what way those seeming bad experiences in the past could have played a role in cultivating the value in which you express and that you are today. Connect those dots in particular for the purpose of being free of the scary projected future. And in doing so, we become more confident in our lives just by this deeper understanding of how evolution and its cycles work. However, when we say, look for the element of good, and this is where the lesson kind of takes a different turn, it's important to note that the efficacy of this depends on the stage of growth we are in. If we are in the middle of painful and confusing situations, just looking for the good isn't going to help at all. In the evolution cycle, there are clear expansion and contraction stages, all equally important and a part of the whole system, a part of the whole cycle of deepening. At this first stage, contraction, which is usually associated with some type of pain and confusion stage, even talking about there being a possibility, talk about there possibly being a benefit in the future for the pain now is so completely irrelevant that someone at that time, that all the walls can go up. When we are in this stage, it just feels like people don't get us if they are trying to fix us. So in this first stage that we're talking about here, we're calling contraction, which is really the pain and confusion stage. We've all been in painful and confusing experiences and parts of our life. And when we're in the most painful parts, particularly right when it's occurring, for even someone to point at us and say that we're wrong or bad or we were doing it wrong or any kind of thing like that only just makes it worse in terms of like throwing up these walls of they can't even communicate with you. Similarly, if we try to fix ourselves too soon, it could feel like repression to put our attention on the good. So you could say a lot of the last lesson was just learning how to put our attention on the good and what that really means. And there's so much value in it, but when we're not at a place when we're in a place of pain and confusion, then it's not helpful or relevant to put our attention on the good because that's more of the second stage. And the first stage, it has a different purpose. And so we need to honor that purpose, the purpose of the pain and confusion. And so rightfully, because this is just not the purpose of this stage, like we were saying, the purpose is the cultivation time for the deeper understanding. The deeper us, it will produce. So it's important to spend time in the emotion. It's important to spend time in that confusion because literally there's something being cultivated through that experience, through that pain. And we can't rob ourselves of the potential growth that could come from that cultivation. So similarly, when we are hurting and someone tries to tell us to get better or get over it or even explain how to move on, we miss out on the fuel for the evolution, like I was just saying, which the fuel in this stage could be described as acknowledgement. So it's like we're truly acknowledging where we are at and what we are feeling. Validation or love. So this stage could be described as any one of those. Those are the important parts of it. Your loving attention is what is needed most frequently in this first stage. One of the preliminary and primary stages in our evolution cycle really is just loving ourselves. That's the opposite of what we want to do, though. When we're in the contraction stage, in the pain and confusion, what we really want to do is to figure out how to get out of it as quick as possible. We don't want to reside in the pain any longer than we have to. And so it's interesting, that's our inclination, is to want to get out of it, but the most helpful thing is just loving exactly that first cycle, loving the pain, loving the confusion, meaning our full attention on it and being with it. And we'll go deeper into that in a minute. So I'm going to read this first part again. One of the preliminary and primary stages in our evolution cycle, this whole thing is describing the evolution cycle, really is just loving ourselves exactly as we are. We are free. We feel whatever emotion is there, as we would accept a hurt or even angry child, knowing that in this moment they are doing their best and are in a deepening process. How would you love a child? So you can reflect on that. Whether the particular interaction with a child is minutes or hours long, it might start with hearing them out, feeling fully. And so we're going over an example of having a conversation with a child who's having a difficulty. And then in each one of these parentheses here, it is how that relates to working with your own emotion, your own pain and confusion in the contracted cycle. So it might start with hearing them out, feeling fully, and this is the emotion part of it, how you work with yourself, feeling fully what the emotion is on the emotion's terms without trying to make it something the emotion isn't. Next, you might empathize or reiterate in order to let the child know you are there with them. And so on the emotional, working with yourself level, this might look like a kind of reinforcing bad behavior, but the emotion needs to know it is okay to be itself first. Then, only after these first two steps can we even consider suggesting an action step in moving forward, like a different perspective or seeing the good. This is the first stage of acknowledgement, validation, or love. In the same way, it can be helpful to work with a child, it can be helpful to work with ourselves in this way. Now, let's go into what that really looks like. We kind of got the concept laid out of how of the need when we're in the contracted, painful, and confusing stage to what we're calling acknowledge or validate or love that part of ourself, that experience. So this is really more detailed what that actually means. When learning to love ourselves in this stage, learning to oscillate from what we are calling love, which really means attention directly on the feeling, accepting it as it presents itself, to what we really want in the end, moving forward or fixing ourselves, is an important balance to understand. So I'm going to read that line again, but without the descriptors there in parentheses. When learning to love ourselves in this stage, the contracted, painful stage, learning to oscillate, and this is the important part, from what we are calling love to what we really want in the end is important, an important balance to understand. It can be helpful to look at emotions in the first stage as a kind of Chinese finger trap. You guys know those things where when your fingers are together and you got the trap over your two fingers, and you pull it apart, it just stays stuck in there more. And the harder you pull, or in this case, the more you try to get out of it or fix yourself or move forward, the more difficult it is to actually move forward or fix yourself. So I'm going to read this one. It can be helpful to look at our emotions in the first stage as a kind of Chinese finger trap. The more we think in them, so the more we're in the emotion thinking with an active emotion, the more of them we become. So the more we try, when we're experiencing the intensity, the truest pain of an emotion, and we try to think our way out of the emotion, the more we become the emotion, the more we become it. Even though our intent by thinking while in an emotion is to get out, it's like a Chinese finger trap and we actually get into it more. Once again, it depends on the stage we are in. After the preliminary intensity of the, because after the primary intensity of the emotion, we can start to think or reflect on the problem situation a little more, but only after the primary intensity is gone. But always still using what the body is feeling as a grounding point for love. And this is a fascinating tool we can use to start to move forward, is using the body as what the body's feeling as the grounding point for love. So what we do is slowly oscillate back and forth between reflecting on the problem situation, so thinking about what we're wanting to resolve, and loving or full attention on what your body's feeling. Okay, so this is really the how to do it right here. After we come to the understanding that when we're in the emotion, in the hardest heart of the emotion, in the thinking about how to get out of it, it's like a Chinese finger trap and it keeps us in there more. After we get that idea down, then we still need to move forward. And so a way that we can begin to move forward, particularly after some of the intensity begins to subside, is using our body as a grounding point for love, or using our body as a grounding point for love, because that's really what we're wanting by trying to think our way out of it, is to feel good again. And the way we feel good again is by putting our full attention on the emotion, which is what I'm calling love here. So that's a helpful way to, after some of the intensity subsides, to begin to actually reason with the problem situation. And so you move your attention up to your mind, and maybe you're reasoning with it a little bit, and then maybe your body starts to feel a little bit intense now. And so always bring your attention back to what you're feeling, back to your body. And so it oscillates back and forth between feeling what your body is feeling, and then after you're grounded again, then you can move back to the problem situation. This is a good framework, what we just talked about here. However, even after describing all of this, a good rule of thumb is usually whatever's happening is the way. So don't try to force anything to be any particular way. Or, like the popular quote, whatever seems in the way is the way. Saying our emotions are kind of like a Chinese finger trap makes it sound like they are bad, which they are not. They act as a propulsion for this stage in the deepening. The analogy of the finger trap helps us to see the importance of love versus fixing ourselves at certain stages in the evolutionary and healing process. So the first stage is all about understanding that oscillation between love, which we're really calling feeling the body, and fixing ourselves, which is a thinking process. And when we understand that balance, we can use our own, the power of our own reasoning and the power of our own mind to a much greater degree when we also know how to ground ourselves on love. And so that's the first stage. And the first stage is primarily grounding yourself on love, and then it slowly will oscillate to or blend in with the second stage, which the second stage is much like what we have been talking about in previous lessons. It says here, in what you might call the second stage, we slowly move from the first stage associated with contraction, which is the pain and confusion, to the second stage, which is associated with expansion within the evolution cycle we have been describing. Here, in the second stage, we can start to incorporate, and this is really what we've been talking about the past couple lessons, the many parts of our life into a more cohesive timeline of benefited growth. This is integration. Integration begins at the completion of a cycle. So it's important to know what cycle you're in order to know which tool to use. The importance of not staying at right and wrong after we have completed a cycle of our life is critical for becoming an integrated person. So the importance of, after the emotional intensity of something had wore off from the past and now we're moving into the second stage to where it's not so much of a problem, it's important at that point to definitely look back and see, kind of like Shara was describing, of how she has, what she has become due to the bad situation. So it's not, you're not stuck at that place as it being critically bad. And this is integrating yourself. This is becoming an integrated person. Integration just means all parts have come together as one operating system, fortified by all past experiences. This extends the capacity for us to move forward in a focused way with an increased ability to love and accept even more people outwardly as the reflection of the parts of our own selves that we have found love for. These two stages of the evolution cycle, contraction and expansion, work together in different ways. Sometimes primarily one stage, other times a combination of the two, working together to polish the diamond you are, which is the process of bringing us closer to the love and understanding that we truly desire at the deepest level. So, in short, there are two stages that we're describing here that can be helpful to identify where you're at in an evolutionary cycle. And I'm going to share the image with you guys now so we can also have a picture to more clearly speak to what we're talking about here. Now give me a thumbs up whenever you guys see. Yeah, cool, great. You see the little spiral thing? Awesome. So here you can see, can you guys see my mouse too? So you know where I'm pointing? Awesome, good. So here we'll say you were much younger. You were very young, and there may have even been multiple cycles of growth that you go through. And here's another one. And let's say right now you're here, and you're pretty high up on these important cycles of learning that are occurring. And this line here will indicate the beginning of a, quote, new cycle. And we have it in red right here, which symbolizes the contraction stage that we were talking about. It's in red because it's the most painful, the most critical, the most confusing. And you know, there may be points of green all along here. It may even be dashed. It may even be like a dashed line instead of completely red, or maybe it's completely red. It depends on the person and the severity and the situation. But the point is there does become a point where it definitely starts to blend together, where now you have more expansion or more freedom in your thinking to start considering other things as we come through here. And then this is the part of expansion, because green represents expansion. And in the expansion, we can totally consider the ideas of how we benefited from this contraction stage over here, the absolute pain and agony of it. So the tool, like we were describing, to use when we're in this red side of things, when we're in the really painful side of things, is the oscillating tool between love and fixing. So you could even, the red here could even represent the tool that we use here mostly is love, meaning just full attention on the emotion without trying to get rid of it. And the more painful and confusing it is, the more intense it is in the moment, the more direct love we need, accepting the emotion exactly as it is. And then as some time goes by and it becomes less intense, like it's kind of indicated here, then we can start using that oscillation body technique that we were talking about, to where we can move our attention up to our thinking now and to the problem situation and begin reasoning. And then if it starts to make our body too intense, which oftentimes a very difficult problem situation can really inflame our body, our emotions, and bring the intensity back, then we move our attention from our thinking to our body, and which is what I'm calling love, and completely accepting the emotion as it is, letting the emotion know that it's okay to be itself, just like you might with a child. And then after you come back to the loving space, then you bring your attention back up to your thinking again, back to the problem situation, and begin working with it again. But this oscillating, this understanding of how to oscillate your attention from loving the body to back to fixing things, or using our reasoning on the problem situation, is critical for not getting completely lost in the Chinese finger trap that emotions can be. And so that's the cycle here, where both the green and the red lines are indicated. And this cycle is where we do mostly the oscillating. The first cycle is mostly just attention on surviving, so trying to love the emotion as it's presenting itself much as possible. And then this is the oscillating part. And then the fully green part is kind of more like what we've been talking about the past few lessons of this is the expansion stage, where we can expand out and really see like how the tree is supported by all these things, and how what may have seemed like a bad situation in the past actually wasn't bad at all, but actually was part of the ultimate process of deepening, and how we're actually using each other to deepen, and that none of it was a bad thing, even though it seemed like it when we were in the contraction stage. And so, and because of that, the value of what we've become today is seen, and that is the integrated process. That is the process of integrating yourself and becoming a powerful human. So I think that that image there illustrates what the lesson was saying, and I'm kind of just wondering if anyone had any thoughts or additions to this, or ways that they see it, or questions or anything like that about what we just covered.
I don't know if this applies or anything, but it's what came to my mind when you were saying all that and thinking about the situation I talked about before. I spent a very long time in that situation, trying to fix the situation and make this better, and everybody had their input, and everybody knew how to fix it, and everybody's telling me what I needed to do. And it wasn't until I realized that I couldn't change what the situation was. It was the situation. And that I quit, everybody quit telling me, because I kept asking them, trust me in this situation, all this kind of stuff. When people finally quit trying to fix it, it wasn't until I quit trying to just make the situation different and just looked at what can I do personally in this situation. What can I do? Not trying to fix it, that, things changed. It would, until I stopped trying to just make it all better and listen to everybody, and looked at myself only, were things better.
That's the same thing that I've been doing as well. The universe has been teaching me how to see the difference between what I can control and change and what I can't. And everything I can change is within me, or in my own actions. It's nowhere else. It's all me.
A big part of it,
Absolutely.
a big part of it too is it's like, okay, what can I change here? In some situations, it may seem like that nothing outwardly, at least, can change. And even though that may be the case, there is one thing that you do still have control over, and that is how you see things, which produces how you feel. And so when we want to change things, we want to change things so we can feel better. And so the important thing then that we would have, that like Shara was saying, that we would have control over of what I think, or what I think we should do is the thinking, how you see things. And that can be a huge point in change, whether instead of it being an outward change as well.
I'm finding changing myself is pretty difficult also.
Totally. Good point. And that's really the point of the lesson too. Is okay whenever, and that's kind of what Shara was saying too. Is that when a big part of this process is accepting the reality of the conditions at hand. And it can be external reality, meaning that this is the situation and the way things are, and also the internal reality, which is the emotions of things. And it's when we get to that point of accepting, meaning, okay, these are the conditions in which we're reasoning from, then at that point is when the change can start to move forward. But if we don't get locked in with the reality of the way things are, and in a true sense that we can actually start reasoning with it, like an actual acceptance of the way things are, then it can seem like we don't even have any control over the way we think or feel or any of that kind of stuff. So that's when, like the lesson was saying, the love stage is still where we're at in that process, the first stage of contraction. And so that means that we need more love. We need more full attention, which really means full acceptance. So we can use the acceptance to start reasoning from that point. And that's a hard stage to be in. Trying to accept the unacceptable, trying to love or put your attention on what you just want to be gone is the most challenging stage. But it is literally an absolutely critical part of the evolutionary cycle that most people completely ignore. And what happens is they push it away, push it down, and then they just move forward with their life. So there's not an actual evolution from that initial problem that occurs. And so the complete acceptance is a critical part that a lot of people get hung up on. The complete loving, or the learning how to put your whole attention on, is a critical part of it. And a hard part too. For sure. Does anyone have any thoughts or suggestions of how they've went through that most critical spot that a lot of people are in and get hung up on in general? It's a difficult spot. I think the most helpful thing for me is the recognition of the Chinese finger trap, whatever that's called, because when I'm in just that recognition that when I'm in those spaces and I'm trying to think my way out of them, just the recognition of, oh, every time I start to think my way out of it, it inflames the emotion. Just that, like playing with that oscillating between thinking and feeling, which is the Chinese finger trap, is the doorway to accepting, is the doorway to loving, is the doorway to the next stage of the evolutionary cycle. And so just playing with the recognition of, okay, every time I think about it, oh, it gets it worse. And so, okay, bring my attention back to the body. And when we start loving our body exactly the way it's feeling, meaning loving the feeling exactly the way it is, then it builds up kind of like it's like investing in the love piggy bank. And so the more you invest in the bank account, the more you love your body, the more you love the feeling that's there, and whatever that turns into, then the greater the investment return is on our thinking capacity, on our reasoning capacity. But if we don't invest in the loving exactly what's happening right now, then there's no power behind the reasoning capacity. So there's no love power. There's none of that higher energy from what the love produces available in the reasoning. It's only the emotional reasoning, which does not work. And so it's just a practice for me, anyways, that recognition of the Chinese finger trap and the value in the potential heightened reasoning that we gain from loving our feelings exactly as they are. Just that recognition of that interplay is a powerful stage in that difficult first evolutionary stage.
I thought about this. I don't know if I can get it out like I say it, but just thinking about a situation that you're in that you're not happy with or that you want to change. It's not that situation is necessarily bad, right, wrong, whatever. What you're thinking about it is what's making it feel right, wrong, wrong, bad, whatever. So it's not necessarily that the situation is bad, it's your thoughts on that situation, and that we have to step back and get out of our heads with it and just accept the situation first. I think you have to, just accept this is what it is, instead of just focusing on, and it's hard when you're in a situation that's, just seems like this is never going to stop, this is never going to end, this is the way life's always going to be, which it's not.
Right.
But we feel like it.
Totally.
And, but it's what we make of it, to me, in our heads. That's where we live with it. And until we step out of that situation in our heads and start looking at it deeper and pulling it apart, and what can I do? What's my role in this? Instead of just focusing so much on this is bad, this is bad, 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 this is wrong. Like you talking about, stepping out of those concepts of right, good and bad, right and wrong, because what's right for you is not right for me. And so we have to just step out of the situation totally.
Perfect. It makes perfect sense. Yes, exactly. I think that was in alignment with everything we've been talking about. Yeah, I think that's great. Hey, Ashley, we haven't heard from you. Do you have anything to input on this? I think you're one of the only people we haven't heard from, I think. If you have anything to say at all, we would love to hear.
I'm not, but what she was just saying about stepping out of that right-wrong thinking, this week has been the first time where I've been able to remember that as I'm experiencing this expansion part. And it's really empowering. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean you can step out of it, but the awareness that you're in it, like, it feels really good to see the first step.
That's so cool.
I think it's the awareness you're stuck in it, that you've got to look at and say, hey, I'm stuck here. What can I do?
Mm-hmm. Ashley, what were you going to say?
Oh, that I feel like some of the parts of the lesson are just written specifically for me to get slapped in the face and like, why have you not seen this? But the fact of when you tell yourself it's okay to have this emotion and that self-love, like, you can be insecure right now. It's okay. Be insecure about it. But let's take some steps later on and think about, why does that make you feel insecure? And like, why do you feel that way? Like, it's just the forgiveness in loving yourself is like my favorite part of this lesson.
Right. Cool. Thank you for that contribution.
I think that an important step on towards being able to heal a major emotional trauma, and I speak from experience here, is being aware and conscious enough, knowledgeable enough to know that there is a process.
Right.
And that in itself, it provides an emotional lifeline.
Totally. It's a supporting.
Knowing that there is a way out, there is that this too shall pass. Because that, if nothing else, gives one hope. And there we can be in emotionally traumatic situations where we feel like there is no light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
And it's one thing in particular I went through many years ago. I didn't realize that, and it made the whole experience so much harder, not realizing and knowing that there was a light at the end of the tunnel.
Right, man. Good point. And you are speaking from experience. I do know that. That's cool. Thank you for that addition as well. It's 7:32 now, guys, so I'm going to share my window one last time and wrap this up. I've got the practices for this week, and of course the same one, read the lesson out loud. And can you guys see the screen? Oh, wait. I think now it's working. Okay, cool. Thumbs up. So the first one, of course, is read the lesson. The second one is the practice. And this time it's practice caring for anything you notice the body experiencing, which is really the essence of what we've been talking about in this whole lesson. And then a fun little thing I put underneath here that kind of helps to support it is, it's good to move forward in life, and sometimes the fastest road is the one we are on, meaning whatever it is we're experiencing. And so to practice caring for anything you notice the body experiencing this week. And then the journal prompt is, what stage of the evolution cycle am I in? So that's an interesting question, because you could be in a different stage, and every different part of your life could be a different stage. And then, of course, it's not as clear like we described as stage 1 or stage 2, but there's definitely in between parts of it too. And so answer that in whatever way you want to, whatever way you think would be helpful. And then the second part to that question is, and how would I describe what that process has been so far and what it might look like moving forward? And so this, kind of like Stan was saying, it's so helpful to know that you're in a process and that this won't last forever. And so for you to describe in your own words what the process has been like so far and then project out to see what you imagine it could be like moving forward would help you to get an idea of what you think the framework could be, and thus know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So that's the couple of things for this week. Before we part ways tonight, did anyone have any immediate questions or thoughts about those little practices for this week? Okay, good. So that's it, guys. I appreciate sharing this time with you guys so much, and it reminds me of how we began class, of the recognizing the value of the framework or the structure of which we can push against or even use our reasoning at that point to grow. And so this whole class, we together in the most beautiful, like, mastermind kind of way, we're speaking to that point in which we all could grow from. So I just value my time with you guys so much. And I will see you all next week.